All right, here we go. So thank you, everyone, and welcome to Design Frugally. So this is about building leaner, smarter, and greener AI interfaces and just digital interfaces in general. We're really excited to have you all here today. This is our third session of the Climate Product Leaders Speaker Series. So just some quick intros. I'll deep dive into them a little bit more afterwards. So first, I'd like to introduce Mike Gifford. So he'll be joining us today. He's the Senior Digital Accessibility and Open Source Strategist at Civic Actions. And our friend Tim Frick, who is a digital sustainability pioneer and the founder of Mighty Bytes, as well as Nolan. She's going to hop back on the call shortly.
I'm here.
Oh, here. Perfect. So Nolan is a member of Climate Product Leaders, as well as a founder herself of Carbon2C, the Green IO US lead, and Green Software Foundation volunteer. So just a little bit of housekeeping to go through today's agenda. We'll start with the small intro and playbook unlock. So that's going to be from Nolan. Then we'll continue into our guest speakers, Mike and Tim, and then we'll have a short Q&A plus some sharing time. So if anybody wants to pipe up and join the conversation today, we would love that. We're also a pretty small group, and we have some experts here. So I think it's a great time if you have questions to ask them. And then we'll just do a quick wrap up. I'll give you some links to the Climate Product Leaders Playbook. So from there, we have created this series because we're really trying to bridge the gap between what Climate Product Leaders is trying to create, which is a playbook of practices for product people and real life. So Mike and Tim are two people who we believe are bringing these sustainability practices to life. And so with that, we want to introduce them and bring them into our speaker series. So I'll let Nolan kind of take it from here and do a little intro of CPL. Nolan, go for it.
Yeah, so CPL Climate Product Leaders is a nonprofit organization that is incorporated in Canada. And our goal is to raise awareness and provide educational material so that all product managers and product leaders are more aware of how to build digital products that are more aligned with sustainability and climate. And not only are aware, but have practical, tools at their disposal and frameworks so that, they are not at loss of what to do. They have a playbook, and that's why we came up with a playbook with 6 principles and 38 best practices from AI to design to, all of what we see a product manager should be exposed to and need to think about to build sustainable digital products. We launched the first version in 2023, and we had over 5,000 downloads/views because now, before we had a PDF, now to make it even lighter and more sustainable, we have a digital interface in our website. So you don't have to download anything anymore. And we wrote a V2 that we published about a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago now, because we thought it was time to update the material, have more use cases, and also AI had been a big growing theme. And so we wanted to give the latest to our community. So not only, so when you look at our playbook, and we'll share, QR code in this presentation, so to have access to that. We have also a specific page for all the use cases. And so you can have real life example from Salesforce to the city of Brussels environment, or some different cases from the industry, government across the world on how they embed rituals, discover mindfully, build sustainable AI product, use their influence, become carbon aware, and design frugally. So the past two sessions we had with Mika and I, we started with building sustainable AI products. Then we had a session on becoming carbon aware. And today we're diving into designing frugally with two experts on the topic who have been experts for many years. So they are really, they're not overnight experts that have read a few prompts on AI on how to do things. So we're really excited to have them both engage with us on this topic. Yeah, I think we can start the conversation.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you want to.
I'll just do a little bit more intro, if that's okay. Just to lead into our guest speakers here, but Nolan, I mean, you've already done an excellent job, so I don't have to say too much more. So Mike, as I mentioned, he's working as a senior digital accessibility and open source strategist at Civic Actions, which is a web development company. And I'm sure he can talk to us a little bit more about what that means. It's a big title. So really a subject matter expert in accessibility and AI tools. Mike focuses on rapid prototyping and open source experimentation. Nice, thanks for sharing. And then Tim, so I should also say that Mike and Tim work pretty closely together, and you guys seem a little bit like yin and yang to me. Honestly, your flow is very good together too, so we're excited for the discussion today. So Tim is a founder of Mighty Bytes. So that's a digital agency serving mission-driven organizations. Something I also love is that they've been a B Corp since 2011. That's quite impressive. And as well as that, Tim is a author of 4 books. Also co-chairs the W3C group responsible for the global web sustainability guidelines.
With Mike, by the way.
With Mike. Oh, okay. There we go. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So yin and yang. So from there, I guess we can open up the conversation. And sure. Nolan, if you want to take it from here, or...
No, I think Tim and Mike can jump in. I think
I was just going to add one quick thing, that Mike and I actually met like 15 years ago now through the B Corp community. I know Jen on the call is from the B Corp community as well. And that's been a big part of the driver for, at least for me, on much of this web sustainability stuff. And Mike has been a really great thought partner to me and to Mighty Bytes for many, many, many years. And so it's been a real treat to work with Mike on the web sustainability guidelines at W3C.
It's always been an effort to try and support people who are leading, and you've really been setting the pace, Tim. So happy to be part of that.
Cool, thank you, appreciate that. So I'll cover this slide here because design is messy, and that's also part of the process. This illustration that's on the screen here is from Damien Newman. He released it 25 years ago now, something like that, in the early 2000s. And the whole premise of it is to kind of illustrate the design process and the fact that design as a process embraces uncertainty and constraints, and it's messy, but it also can help to reduce risk and improve resilience. And most importantly, design processes can help foster trust and collaboration among stakeholders, which is a big part of sustainability. And so now we have AI, which is kind of thrown into the mix on literally everything: design processes, development processes, across the board, anything digital. You can't swing a cat without hitting an AI tool. And it can increase risk, and it can potentially undermine these human-centered design processes, but it also has a huge environmental impact. It's the source for numerous social and economic problems, which we don't need to get into here. But it can also enhance discovery, it can improve efficiency, it can fill gaps in human knowledge. So there's a lot of questions in the industry right now about how we should, meaningfully use AI in design processes and in prototyping and stuff like that. For us at Mighty Bytes, for all the reasons mentioned above, we recommend a really rigorous human-centered discovery process up front, which is that messy part of the squiggle on the screen. And we do that with our clients and other stakeholders to co-create potential solutions. So, with AI in the mix, we're using the humans for what they're good at, which is creativity and context and empathy and ethics and stuff like that. And, as we evolve this practice, using AI for what it's good at, which is filling insights from large data sets and capturing and synthesizing ideas and prototyping ideas and running experiments and stuff like that. So that's just kind of my intro to like where we're at in the design, in incorporating design and AI, and the fact that we're embracing the uncertainty that comes along with it, because there's a lot of that right now.
It's interesting how there's actually so much more uncertainty. We have smaller budgets. There's questions about how do you, whether you're talking about synthetic people and synthetic user experience, or whether you're looking at just accumulating the information that's available, and how it's possible to go off and to summarize as effectively as possible the input from thousands of people, and it's a challenge, like making sure you're managing those stakeholders and organizing your processes. So at the end you get something that works for all of your stakeholders.
Yeah, and I'd also add, like, with the exception of the B Corp community, like I still have conversations, even though we've been working on this for a really, really long time, that don't understand why stakeholders should be included in the mix, which is still like kind of shocking to me sometimes. And sometimes it's just kind of like, I don't have the resources and time to put into all of that. And other times it's kind of like, well, this is my product, this is what I'm working on. And so like there is also, for us at least, through the discovery process, an education thread that kind of goes throughout to making sure that people understand the why alongside the how.
So it's amazing how much energy could be saved simply by not developing something that has no real purpose.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
And so how do you strike a balance between the experimentation and governance, especially in this discovery process?
Yeah, I think that for me personally, the education process that I just mentioned, kind of weaving that thread through, is really making sure that people are kind of aware of the kind of hidden impacts of digital and what those could mean. And so, most people, if they've managed a website or a product before, they're aware of accessibility issues, but maybe they do the bare minimum. They are probably aware of data privacy issues, usually because that's, associated with being sued. And so they have like those kind of baseline, governance principles in place to basically reduce those risks. But yet still, it's amazing to me the number of organizations we run into who understand that good governance is important, but are really, really terrible at it. And so, I still question sometimes why that is. And I think, like I said, in our discovery process, we're incorporating educational, elements into the mix so that we're, kind of shepherding folks along. But sometimes the people that we're working with are in marketing and communications, or maybe they're in product. And the governance component usually lives in the C-suite or at the organizational level. And sometimes there seems to be kind of like either a silo or something that's not allowing them to basically communicate in a meaningful way. And now that AI is thrown into the mix on both of those sides, that can really potentially, create all sorts of risks.
And especially for data governance, I mean, I'm thinking AI is useful for data analytics and doing a lot of things with data. If data governance doesn't exist, I mean, garbage in, garbage out, and that it's garbage at scale with AI, or like, I don't know. Anything you wanted to add, or Jim or Mike on this topic?
Yeah, I think
that there's a really interesting. There's an interesting opportunity to say, how do we try and use some of the new AI tools to be able to experiment earlier in the process, like as opposed to developing a comprehensive wireframe in Figma that gets evaluated. Are there ways that we can develop more earlier prototypes that actually work and are using HTML and CSS, using AI somewhere like GitHub or somewhere that's like a self-hosted, like it's a real thing with real tangible assets that are not going to be bound to Figma or other proprietary tools. Are there ways that you can reuse as much as possible as part of the process, so that you're not necessarily building from scratch, but using design systems again, so you're able to work on patterns that have already been tested and evaluated. So again, you're not starting from a blank page. You're starting from a known entity that is being tested and evaluated, and have those as sort of assumptions as part of the building process. Not that you're going to necessarily be limited by the design options, but that's the baseline you're going to be working from. And also, how do you think ahead in terms of your design process, so you're not trying to, like, so many people forget about things like dark mode until after the project is already launched. And it's like, well, if you think about that early in the process and have your color scheme built for light mode and dark mode, you're going to be much better set for when you actually try and implement dark mode. If you haven't thought about your color contrast for light mode and dark mode, then it's going to be much more expensive to implement that solution when the time comes to it.
And so I think you mentioned leveraging AI earlier to prototype and test ideas, and so the next question is, what are the implications of using AI in design processes? Anything to watch for in particular, or other implications that you see? Like thinking ahead, thinking,
start with this one?
Yeah. I don't like.
I mean, one of the big challenges is just from a if you think about AI as a design partner, that's really quite a useful way to begin. But it is a design partner that is designed to flatter you, and that's designed to go off and provide an affiliate, like for you to have an affiliation with it that we don't get with things like Google search. It's much more, oh, Mike, that was a brilliant suggestion. Like we're constantly getting bombarded by those affirmations because of the way these tools have been designed. But that has real challenges when we're thinking about being critical of what our design partner can provide for us. And I think we need to be more. I mean, there's ways that you can try and tone down that, but also just be critical of the answers that you're getting from AI, and being aware that there's limitations about things like hallucinations that come in that you have to constantly trust but verify, because it may sound good and authoritative, but if you don't actually do the legwork to validate that these summaries are accurate, you may be going off on a completely different set of tangents that you wouldn't have ever come onto before if you hadn't been sent on this wild goose chase from AI.
Yeah, and that's really where I think the sustainability angle ties in the most, right? I mean, that you could, if you're not super experienced in this area and also using a brand new set of tools that strokes your ego every step of the way, you might think that you're on completely the right path, and then you create something or build something or release something that has all kinds of risks associated with it, and also is that some of which are security related, but some of which are actually environmentally related based on where you host it or based on how efficient it is and that kind of thing. And so there's definitely pitfalls to look up for which when you have a rigorous discovery process up front, you're learning together, you're co-creating the solutions, and you're also taking advantage of typically people who have a lot of experience, people along the experience spectrum. And the subject matter expertise spectrum and stuff like that. And so by, managing that process effectively, you can make much more reasonable and responsible and sustainable decisions throughout an entire project, including post-launch and maintenance and all of that kind of stuff. And that, goes for, I see there's a question in the chat about emissions, but there's also all kinds of other stuff that if you're really talking about sustainability for people and planet, that should be kept in mind.
And so one of the things I've been exposed to in some trainings on AI and for sustainable AI and Keith Climate and other organizations is that since we know AI hallucinates, of course it's good to have humans in the loop, just like you are just telling us. and verify the hypothesis, but it's also good to do some pre-work or post-work with other AI agents or AI chatbot or whatever, but say, hey, I want to be this criticized person, or try to demolish what this other AI has told me, you know, like just to have not just one voice that tells you quote unquote the truth, but more like, okay, it's a system that is fallible. How do we still think through this system so that it not autocorrects specifically, but have other perspective?
It is quite useful for having those other perspectives, isn't it? Like it can be quite useful to go off and say, like, even from a meeting, like, well, what would a designer have heard from the transcript of this meeting? What would an engineer have heard? Because people will pick up on different cues and hone in on them, and might hear a very different message. So if you can play the various different personas as part of the project, and then perhaps even as you're implementing it. But again, those are simulations in terms of what a real person would actually think about, and they might be useful to help guide your process a little bit. But building the web is really a team project. It's a team sport. So how do you actually? We don't want to go off and replace those people by virtual AI agents that can play the role of a user researcher, or to play the role of some other position in your firm. You want to be able to say, well, how can we use AI to augment those people so that we can actually have a higher quality of deliverable, and to build on the expertise and the knowledge that people have, to make sure that they're able to bring their A game to the project at every stage.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's really where good design shines. You know what I mean? That you know, if you're able to come into those workshops, you know, yes, you're going to co-create the solutions together. People who are visual thinkers, especially, are going to be able to react to something that they if they can actually, you know, interact with it or view it. And so going into those workshops with some of that research already done and saying, all right, here's something that was, you know, kind of prototyped or built or even just sketched out, or, you know, or some research that was done, you know, by AI. Let's rip it apart as humans and figure out what are the things that we can save. How can we use this AI generated material to build a better product spec, and where is it going to strengthen our process, and where could it potentially weaken it? Because AI lies a lot.
Yeah. And so, since you mentioned prototype, I think it leads us to our next question on how those AI tools, you know, when you work during discovery and you want to show maybe quick prototypes to your end users and all the constituents you're speaking to build a product, how does this complicate the process versus, you know, complement it or ease it? Is it all of, you know, and, you know, more complicated and more easy in some, you know, easier in some aspects?
Sure. Complement, you can, you know, go through a bunch of design concepts really quickly. You know, that it speeds up that process really quickly. Complicate, you know, again, if you're talking about research or data sets or, you know, kind of going out to the web and pulling back and synthesizing information, you know, being mindful of hallucinations and that kind of stuff is like the baseline. You know, again, humans in the loop, as you said, it's a terrible term, but I you know, it is really absolutely necessary, especially for these processes.
Yeah, especially because the end user is still human in many cases. So it's always good to have the real like interaction with who is going to use the product in the end.
Yeah, and then just one more thing I'll add is that from a sustainability perspective, I think that we're at the same place. You know, again, with the chat that was down on the models for emissions, I feel like we're at the same place now that with AI and emissions and measuring all of that kind of stuff that we were like 10 years ago with the web, you know, and that there's still a long way to go. And the biggest problem that I see personally is that none of the companies are disclosing the data that's needed. And so, you know, as responsible technologists, what role do we play, whether you're a designer or developer or whatever, in getting that governance in place and getting that, you know, kind of responsible regulatory guidance that says, hey, this information is valuable and we need it. And so, you know, it's your responsibility, AI company XYZ, to provide it so that we can, you know, make more responsible products. And that includes, you know, prototyping processes and discovery processes and that kind of stuff.
And we do have so much power in terms of how we invest our limited money. If we're able to work collectively, if we're be able to talk about our choices. I know a lot of people have looked at moving from ChatGPT to Anthropic as a more ethical option, but again, we look at the carbon aspect of this. This is not necessarily it's not a very well thought through process. Still, a lot of that the AI behind the Claude are being generated in the same sort of data centers that Grok is using.
Yeah.
So they're not, and it's also still a proprietary model, which is still collecting and aggregating information. So there might be a marginal improvement, but it certainly isn't as good as a Green PT or Minstrel. Like, there are other AI models that are more respecting of privacy, that are more respecting it. Like, how do we make sure that we're supporting the types of AI futures and companies that we want? In terms of complicating and complicating the process, one thing that I was thinking about recently was listening to a podcast about design, and how there's some architecture firms that are moving away from the 3D rendered models of buildings that they're creating, because you can give people an immersive experience that they can put on with their 3D goggles, and they can walk through and get a feeling of what a building is like. But an experienced architect might actually be able to be wanting to measure something differently than an unexperienced buyer might. Things like, how do people gather? Where would people walk from within the building or between buildings? And so there's some architecture firms that are moving back to using like little matchstick models that are able to gather and organize the more important aspects of the architecture, like what the building looks like and what colors the chairs are. That doesn't matter. What matters is what are the bones and the infrastructure of the space you're trying to build. And there's analogies with digital as well. And so often, if you can quickly build a prototype, then suddenly it's like, well, it works. Let's just use this. Why do we need to do any additional discovery? So I think that the speed with which prototypes can be built and be working with live data, it can really, in many ways, compromise the design process if you're able to. If the client doesn't understand that this is just one part of the process, and that it needs to be something that is engaged, you still need to involve the stakeholders, even if you have a working prototype of what one or two people think about. You need to have a better sense of how this is going to affect the broader community.
Yeah, I want to jump just before going to the next question on something you mentioned, which is, I think, a part of the challenge is that even when you're trying to find more ethical or greener, more sustainable AI labs, things are changing so quickly. So for the longest time, Anthropic was, using data centers that were maybe, I don't know, like the base, let's say, and then they went to XAI. And I remember people on LinkedIn say, oh, we're, sustainability is super important to us, so we're switching from Anthropic to Google. But I saw that now Google also has switched also to XAI, so they're also on Grok. Like buying the infrastructure from Colosseum and whatever. So it can, from one week to another, depending on the need of those companies, can change very quickly. So far, of course, Green PT in Europe has been great, but as we have also regulation around data, just as sometimes with the GDPR, the data needs to be local, and some American companies have the same and say, oh, in Green PT is in Europe, so we cannot use it, so it's very complex. So we are all dealing with a level of complexity. I think as sustainable technologists and citizens, we should still try to influence for more renewable energy and sustainable use of water and all of that. But in the meantime, yes, everything we can do from our design, from our product mindset or developer mindset to minimize at least the consumption of our software and hardware on all those resources. Yeah. Okay. So which I don't know. You wanted to add something, Tim, but.
No, I was agreeing with you.
Okay.
Wholeheartedly.
So yeah, so next question is right there. Where does sustainability fit into frugal design? And I think we were just heading there.
Yeah.
be more frugal, how to use less fewer resources, less energy, emit less carbon, having that in mind, designing it from the get-go, sustainability by design.
Well, actually, Marnie's, I mean, in some ways, Marnie's point from a little while ago is definitely on point here. Like trying to think about how do we use it and be conscious of our use of it, and not just sort of assuming that AI is going to be part of the solution. I think that trying to respect those people who are trying to go off and to maintain the AI vegan approach. Like maybe they don't want to use AI at all, or maybe they're trying to limit it as much as they possibly can in their day-to-day digital lives. There's lots of advantages to that, and we still need to support those people. But being conscious of the impact of AI is important, but not forgetting that humans running around with our computers and our devices and flying to conferences and other things are things that also have an impact. So trying to be aware that we can, as part of our sustainability, like AI is just one part of the equation that we need to be looking at. And there are certainly still ways that AI can reduce the overall impact if we use it properly and are conscious about how we implement it.
Anything do you want to add now?
Yeah, I have so many thoughts. I think where I struggle with like the kind of balancing of what is known as producer responsibility versus individual responsibility. I'm all for both, but as individuals, we can only go so far, and we can only have agency over so much. And so I definitely use that as a baseline in my own work, obviously, and that kind of thing. But as time has gone on, I've dedicated much more of my time around helping people understand that there might be a better way forward, and where does kind of collective action fit into that. And so can I reserve some of my time to be focusing on responsible tech policies, for instance, even though as a designer that may not be my lobbying, politicians may not be my jam. It is something that is really, really important in this regard, and is also going to directly affect me, my company, my industry, the people I work with, our clients, and everything. And so thinking, about like, where do I strike that balance, and so a lot of times with that in mind, I sometimes struggle with the word frugal, because it feels very penny pinchy and maybe very kind of less than, and rather I would like to inspire people to say, hey, maybe there's, especially for people who are like hyper focused on competition and hyper focused on growth, they might look at something, frugality as losing their edge, so to speak.
Versus optimize to the best possible.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and so figuring out how to kind of help people understand that there's a better path forward, and for us mainly the language change has been relatively simple. It's really about, rather than focus on more, let's focus on better. And it tends to appeal to people who tend to respect quality. And at Mighty Bytes, my company, we're all about making sure that we can produce the highest quality in the things that we deliver. And so, and it also, when you dovetail that with web sustainability, it helps that the goals that business leaders typically have for a website or a product or something like that are very well aligned with sustainability principles. It's, can be reduced cost, improved efficiency, improved performance, improved usability, all of those things, reduced risk, all of those things are very much aligned with sustainability. So a lot of times I'm conscientiously thinking about the language I'm using when I'm talking about this, and then figuring out how we roll that into the work that we do, and how do we build performance budgets and responsible policies for companies, and that's one of the things I love about the work that I do with Mike and Inez and the rest of the folks at the Web Sustainability Interest Group at the W3C, is that we're constantly thinking about these things and having these conversations and kind of figuring out what are the best ways to communicate this stuff to a populace that largely doesn't understand it.
I was listening to a podcast from the Volts WTF podcast, where they were talking about more or less. If you're just in your language, if you're doing polling and you people inherently want to have more, and they'll vote for something that where there's more of something rather than less of something else, even if it means the same thing. We're as a species, we're not too intelligent by half. So trying to think about that. On the other hand, we're in a space where everyone is so much more pinched than we were, even a year ago, and energy crisis that we're all facing. There's uncertainty in our not just because of AI, but in society in general. Like we are very much facing a rupture in so many of the assumptions about how the world was supposed to operate. And so Frugal in some ways is also a nice way to go from to bring people in who are looking for more affordable options and more incentives. So trying to say, can we find ways to I think that the use of AI it can be done as part of a move towards more frugal design. Using design patterns can be really quite useful, so that you're not building everything from scratch. You're able to learn from the mistakes of others, because that's just part of being precautious and taking a measure where you're being respectful and responsible for precious resources. So frugal design does speak to that side, but I agree it's a really a mixed bag, and depending on who is hearing that, then you're going to want to use a different lever for that.
Yeah.
But it's still like you can have smaller, more accessible websites are definitely something that benefit everyone. Like nobody benefits from these images that could easily be displayed on the on the side of a building like that. That is it. But sometimes people are shipping these images that are just so large that they could easily be scaled up to a much larger size. And let alone removing old JavaScript libraries or just not thinking about the implications of the legacy code that they haven't bothered to clean up, all the technical debt that's just built into the design that people are working with.
Yeah, and then just to reiterate or put some even more emphasis on something you said, is like you need to to be aware of who you're speaking with, and for the choice of vocabulary, Tim, it's very important. And I think yes, as you were saying, frugal maybe seems cheap here in the US, but for example in Europe it would be more associated with quality, but not that much
Nice.
in the US. So it just depends who who is your audience.
Yeah.
And I think in product management, we know that your audience is very important. So let's adapt and be flexible. And then risk. Yeah. So speaking of risk, what do those new AI tools, what kind of new layer of risk do they introduce? And how can we improve resilience in AI-enabled products? Which are the next question. And for sure,
Yeah.
a lot of security issues and things we're going to discover as we embrace those AI-enabled products.
Yeah, I actually, if you want to just go to the next slide, I put some of those risks to the right side of this slide, just because I think we've been talking about how the design process is inherently messy up front. It has a lot of uncertainty associated with it, and through the design process, you go through the synthesis of understanding insights and everything like that. It's worth noting that obviously in using AI tools, especially that can happen post-launch as well, and the issues that we see the most, work slop and technical debt, like as Mike just mentioned, as well as kind of figuring out the emissions footprint of something, especially as people are adding 5 megabyte images to every page and all of that kind of stuff. And that happens a lot. It's still surprising to me how often that happens. And so, doing due diligence around this stuff is really, really important, because using tools that don't have the context that you as a human do, can, especially on the misinformation side and any number of things, security, like there's a bunch of risks that can come up that, people need to be aware of and need to be vigilant of over time as they manage and maintain the products that they're working on. And that is my soapbox. I will step down from it now.
I mean, one of the other risks is just that AI is so driven towards a individual person developing a product, and you can see so much of the work that I've put out on GitHub that'll be shared with a presentation are my one-off projects where I'm thinking about an idea and I can execute an idea, a working idea, and have it sit on GitHub and showcase and talk about an idea that hasn't been out there in the world before, but I'm able to create it, make it real and tangible. But there's no governance behind that. It's just me with an idea. And if you're an organization and you've got some smart kid who's able to go off and build some tools like I do, and then sort of release them, it's like, well, what happens when that person goes to another organization? Or it's in the open source community, it's called the bus factor. Where somebody wins a lottery or gets hit by a bus, and they're no longer there. They're the only ones who understood it. And this is actually amplified with AI because one person can do so much in a particular way, but if they stop doing that, or if they're building their entire tool set on a particular AI engine, and that tool set is no longer available because it was bought out by somebody else or it was merged with something else, like there's just so many external vulnerabilities that organizations are left with if there isn't governance around it. And this is why open source is really quite important in this, is that you can have a framework that you can work within and you can iterate around. So I'm a Drupal core accessibility maintainer, and there's the kinds of, there's just so many people who've evaluated and used Drupal and have built on and enhanced Drupal to be a really solid community project. It's something that has a governance structure around that. And there's a lot of open source projects that have that, but they're also being challenged by AI, because now why would I go and start with Drupal when I can just go off and vibe code something from scratch? And again, it's that we don't in our present mindset have a real appreciation of governance. Just like if you're writing content, it is so easy to get AI to write an article, and so many people think that is writing the article is the hard work, and it has been the hard work. But right now the hard work is shifting from writing the article to editing and publishing. Like how do you make sure that you have that article is in your voice, and that you're speaking in a manner that represents you, and that you're not the editing is a much harder part of it now, but that's not what we've been trained to do. So much of our training is built on the creation process, but the creation is now easier. So we need to sort of get to the level of like, how do we establish taste so that people can know what is good content or not good content, and be able to more quickly fail forward, so we're able to find what doesn't work and learn from our users, and be able to innovate on that as quickly as possible to get to what does work, and to learn from what our users are doing and what our stakeholders are demanding.
Yeah,
plus one to all of that.
And then I think there is something we've not seen too much of, but that apparently when you read all those AI news is coming, is all the cybersecurity concern with code that's been infested. And I've just read I don't know where it was, maybe Wired or whatever. It's like a lot of open source now has been infected by AI kind of hackers or whatever. So everything is becoming more complex, more tricky, more dangerous, more risky. So
yeah, I mean that's
easy.
why I put security first on that list down there on the right side, because that was the first thing that popped to mind when we were talking about this question.
And it's not like, I mean, there definitely there's AI models like Mythos, which are bringing forward a lot of concerns, and they're it'll be interesting to see how our world reacts to that, and how we're able to build a more secure framework that is following those best practices and doing that consistently. In general, open source code is more secure than proprietary code, because there's more eyes looking at it. That basic idea, and especially if it's being used by, if it has a critical mass of people behind it, then it's something that can really have a great deal of security baked in because of the number of people who are using it and have reviewed the code that's involved. But yeah, being very aware of that and saying, okay, well, how do we look at the SBOM, the software bill of materials, that sort of like, what is all of the layer of technology that's involved? Because in most software that you're using, even proprietary software, I'm using a Mac, and Mac is a very, very proprietary company, but the underlying operating system of what I use is FreeBSD, so it's a very open source operating system underneath the user interface that I am working with. And this is the case with most technology. There's very little technology out there that doesn't use some form of open source, but often people are forking the tools and not necessarily contributing back upstream. They're not necessarily looking at governments being particularly bad at wanting to be able to identify security barriers, security issues in software that they know about, hoping that nobody else does, so that they can then compromise another state actor, as opposed to reaching out and fixing the security issues so that everyone is more secure. They've historically looked at ways of maintaining their advantage in a cyber war that other people, that holds us all to some degree at ransom.
Mm-hmm. So I think right now we can switch to the Q&A, sorry, not QA, Q&A portion.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I haven't seen too many questions in the chat, but I have not looked diligently.
I mean, I was thinking that we could maybe just make sure we have Durga's question fully acknowledged here. I know, Mike, you answered, but he was just asking about the standard model used to measure carbon emissions and energy efficiency of digital products. And then Durga said that he's used the SWDM V4 model on a few occasions and is wondering if that is the best. Maybe, Mike, you want to take that one?
I don't actually know if that's the best model. I think that there's a challenge where all of this is changing quite quickly, and both in terms of the use of hardware and software, and the way we're using data centers, like measuring this, especially in when you're dealing with internet-enabled devices and cloud computing, it's a challenge. And I think that there's a lot of people who are looking for what is the best, and I don't know that that's necessarily the right approach. I think it's better to go off and say, how do you benchmark with whatever tool and framework you're using to make sure that you're better today than you were yesterday, right? Building that continual improvement mindset into whatever tool you're using. And we might get to a stage where we have enough insight into how much computing is used on an individual request on any given web or software platform. But there's just so much variability in that it's I think better to focus in on what can you do now with what you know and what metrics are available.
I would plus one to everything Mike just said. I also, as a co-author of this SWDM model, we've tried to be really clear from up front with the Green Web Foundation and Whole Grain Digital and all the other contributors to that model that it's all models are wrong, some are useful, as the saying goes, and stuff like that. And so, using it as if you're looking at that, like I discouraged anybody ever to use the word calculator with any of these things, because they are not providing correct data. They are providing a starting point for you to have conversations, and this is especially useful for people who don't understand web or digital sustainability, who've never been involved in this and don't understand that there's any kind of impact. I would say, sure, go with the SWDM model, because it's a great place to start. It's a great place to start having these conversations, but be careful in how you talk about it. Don't use calculator, say evaluation or assessment instead of measurement. I mean, there's just, again, language matters, right? Like the way that we talk about this stuff is really important. And so if you're going to use that as a starting point, and it's purposely designed to be a low barrier to entry for much of this stuff, then use it and say, all right, this is for us to get started. The next step is to actually think about a longer term, bigger kind of like understanding what resources we have to devote to this so that we can really truly start incorporating it with, for instance, the emissions reporting our company is already doing or is required to do. Like, how do we start bridging that gap? Given that there are so many gaps in the data, not only in the model, the SWDM model, but anywhere because of some of the things that we've already mentioned.
And how do we use this to go off to act so that we're able to, it's like, you know, we can, like, in the accessibility world, people spend a lot of time generating reports and looking at debating which is the best accessibility checker out there and what are the options around that. But in some ways, it doesn't really matter if you're if you're not acting on those reports. If you're getting your VPAT and you're just sort of letting it sit till the next year when you regenerate the next list of VPATs, like you're not benefiting from you're wasting a lot of time and effort in the performance of generating a report, whereas really needs to be to say, well, what can you learn now about this? How can you take that general principle of how do we use less compute in our processes? How do we use less resources? Where are there places that we can where we can just disable a service because it's not actually providing use, but it is consuming resources? So turning things off is so hard to do, especially for me. But it's so important to be able to say no about what are the things that you're not going to do and focus in on where you're delivering value.
Yeah, for sure.
And I would say, so on that note also, there are a few standards that are emerging, but the same standards are not for the sake of standards. I've seen in the chat the software, so SCI, software
carbon intensity.
Thank you so much, Tim. So you have standards like this by the Green Software Foundation or others that are great to embrace, but again, for action. And then also thinking as well that right now more and more, we had regulatory risk. Now maybe there's a bit of step back on the regulatory front in the US, and then even in Europe because of the competition of AI, there are things that are a bit rolled back and stuff. But climate change is not disappearing. So now it's more like, hey, what is the risk exposure? Soon insurance, for example, in Florida are not going to cover any floods, just like in California, they don't cover earthquakes. And so, you have the risk lens on all of what you do. And then the financial impact on that, on the value of your company. And so there is also in Europe the double materiality reporting. So not only do you need to report your impact on climate, but also the climate risk on your company. So the lens is going to shift a little bit, but climate change is not disappearing just because regulation is on hold. So more and more it's going to be risk management, and so it's the action part is extremely important. So any tool, even if it's a estimation and directionally, I mean it's for action and trying to reduce exposure, risk, and our own impact on the problems.
There's a phrase, culture eats policy for breakfast. And a friend of mine, Ryan Andrusoff, came up with an addition to it, which is that incentives culture eats policy for breakfast. Because like, what are the incentive structures? And unless we change those incentive structures, we're never going to actually see very much change within our infrastructure. And I think that in so many of our organizations, procurement is the incentive structure that drives change. Sure. And so if we're able to, like in the US, there was quite a lot of a head start on accessibility because there was an incentive structure built in around Section 508, and companies were getting sued because their websites were not accessible. Some of that was ambulance chasers, but not all of them. And I think that that incentive is really that risk, driving it up to the C-suite and getting them to take it seriously was something that did in some ways change the incentives there, and it's starting to happen with the European Accessibility Act and the Web Accessibility Directive in Europe as well. So I think this is one way of trying to shape those incentives that we're working with, and we need to have something like that around sustainability so that we can start to shape those.
And that's the hope with the WSGs, like that really, honestly, that the web sustainability guidelines are there. Probably, I mean, there's a lot of reasons for them, but probably one of the primary ones is to have exactly what Mike says for sustainability, so that it can start to influence legislation and policy and that kind of stuff around the world, and we can start to have those incentives. You know, I love being part of the B Corp community because those incentives are kind of built into just being in the community. But you know, we need, you know, a lot more companies to act like B Corps. And so if you know, being voluntarily doing so is not going to cut it, then regulatory guidance can.
All right. Just because we're approaching time, I just want to do a quick scan of the room, see if there's any last minute quick questions. But if not, this kind of concludes our session today. So it went by pretty quickly, but huge.
I can answer Jen's question really quickly.
Yeah.
The web accessibility guidelines at this point, I don't think there's a whole lot of consideration for AI because they're still very much involved in the WK 3.0 framework. There's been some discussion.
I meant sustainability guidelines. Because I was trying to take
Yes, there's absolutely,
yes,
absolutely
okay.
in the sustainability guidelines. It's
Okay.
a conversation we have every week.
Yeah. Okay. How are you trying to address that? And I'm sure that is a very deep dive, but like through incentives or through, you know, trying to get people to deliver more data. I know that's a big piece. Is trying to get companies to share more information.
Yeah,
Setting benchmarks for that.
And also one thing worth, I think probably the biggest hurdle that we face there quickly is that you know, AI changes so rapidly, and yet specifications and standards don't. And so like, how do you create something that is going to live, you know, for a long time, but also
It'll move faster than laws.
right. Yeah, that's true. That is true. But yeah, so that we're definitely, and you know, one nice thing for us is that the remit of the WSGs is the web. And so as we would dedicate AI, you know, or dedicated content to AI, it would be specifically in you know, how AI is used through the web, which is of course how it's delivered. So I mean, there's definitely a big part there. And the current guidelines have a bunch of, you can filter by AI and look at the ones that are relevant to AI as well. But there's also there's a long list of things that we're looking to do in the future moving forward with specifically with AI.
Nice. Thanks for the question, Jen.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. And good to see you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And we hope you can join us for our next event. We're not sure when that is yet, but look out for the announcement on LinkedIn. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, Tim. And thank you, Mike. It was awesome to have you here.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Talk to
you
soon.
so much.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, well, that was fun, and we'll see we'll look forward to what happens after this.
Yeah, sounds good.